Cool. We're good to go.
Hey everyone, so this is the SIGAUT KMS sub-meeting number 17 for August 23rd, 2022. So today we're going to discuss KMS V2 items for 126. I think the best way to organize that, at least starting off, is do you happen to have the link to our board handy? Otherwise, I'm just going to go look for it.
Yeah, I have it.
So Anish and I had started organizing the KMS work into a project board on the Kubernetes org, which I'm going to share my screen in just a second so everyone can see it. Okay. Actually, I'm going to ask somebody else to share because I haven't set up Zoom to have the privacy stuff. So I'm going to have to restart all of Zoom if I do that. So please somebody else share your screen. I'll make everybody co-host so we can do that. Who wants to do it? Anybody? Anybody's allowed.
I can share screen.
Okay, thank you. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back. If y'all want to keep talking, that's fine. I just gotta be right back.
Is this somehow private? Yeah, it looks like I don't have access to it.
Same for me as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
It says page not found.
private.
Yeah, it's private.
Oh yeah, I think it's a private one actually.
Yeah. It's okay.
But I don't know how I have access to it. Maybe you just need to be part of a specific group to have access to it.
Yeah, most likely.
What happened? Sorry.
This project board is private, so I think Christoph and a few others don't have access to it.
Let's make it public. Why is it private?
Yeah, you can make it public normally.
Or I wonder if you have to be part of Kubernetes org or something.
No, if it's public, you don't have to.
But yeah, it was not intended to be private because we don't do that. Okay, only organization owners can change project visibility. Really?
Yeah, or the person that created the project, I think.
But I created the project. Why can't I change
Oh,
it?
and you can't?
Uh,
Because recently we've been doing it like for CubeSync metric and it worked. Like we switched it from private to public.
Yeah. I mean, this is a new project board. Well, that's annoying. Okay.
I don't think you have to do anything special for few of us to see this. So maybe we can follow up later.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as as long as we can make sure like Christoph and everyone can see it. That's frustrating. Okay. So okay. I don't think you've added the done stuff yet, right, Anish? You were gonna just
No, we have to do that, yeah.
Okay. So we were kind of following the same pattern that we have for the SIGAUT triage board, just the same kind of swim lanes. So let's see, I guess I can just start with the backlog. So Rita, you have the bug for making it so that custom resources get encrypted at rest, because they don't, which is, or it can't be, no matter how you try, it won't work. So this is just a wiring mistake on our part, well, somebody's part, maybe not ours. Is there any questions about this one?
Does that need any enhancement doc probably, or proposal, you think?
It does not. If you look at the PR that was closed, that was an initial attempt at this, I got sign off from both David Eads and Daniel Smith that this is perfectly fine. It's just a bug fix and does not require any.
Okay, got it.
So this has been open for a while. We just need to fix it. Because storing secrets in custom resources should be fine. You should be able to define a fancy secret custom resource. Should be.
Is it, just from my knowledge, is it like encrypted by default, or does it require to be in the resource list?
So it's today.
It would be the resource list, right?
Yeah. So today, if you try to put in, some fancy,
it's gonna fail.
It'll silently fail. It won't do anything. It just won't realize it's supposed to do anything. So that's problematic for, like, for example, Rancher has some token resource thing that's a custom resource. OpenShift gets around this by having aggregated APIs that still support encryption at rest correctly, but if OpenShift before moved to a ton of custom resources, then it's totally normal for people to want to put secrets in there, because that's what it's for. The resource, CRDs are generic. But this is not necessarily KMS v2. It's just that we want this to just work correctly, so it's not surprising to people. The one aspect of this that's theoretically related to KMS v2, which we haven't discussed yet in one of these meetings, is, but I had brought it up, I think, once before, was some ability to support, like today, the encryption config requires you to specify which resources are encrypted. I would just like to encrypt everything.
Yes, please.
That does require the KMS integration to be effectively bulletproof, or incredibly much more resilient than the beta API was. The one time I talked to Jordan about this, he was like, "Well, you're crazy," but I'll make it better. I'll make V2 not fall over if you have more than 5 secrets or something. So what do folks think? Should we add that to the KEP as something to get reviewed and have discussion on, I guess?
Maybe when we reach beta.
What do you mean?
It's too early for that conversation, I feel. Like there's a lot of prerequisites that need to happen. Like, for example, this bug needs to be fixed first, obviously. And the alpha thing, I think, in order to do it for all, like, I think it would need to be at least a bit more mature. I mean, granted, it's still a feature flag, right? Like, you're still thinking it would be another feature flag, right?
No, I'm thinking it would just be part of this KEP, right? So the idea would be is that basically all I'm asking for is some way to tell the API server when I'm wiring up this KMS provider, it's meant to encrypt everything, not just some particular resource, right? So that the trivial way to express that is to, instead of having root resource always just be strings, you could let it support star, for example, as a way of saying, well, stars, just as in stars in RBAC, arbitrarily match any string. You could do that as a way of not changing any APIs, just enhancing what they can express in place. The discussion I would want to have with folks is, well, do we want to do that? not a like how do we do it and what time to do it. Is like, do we want to do it at all? It's like, for example, you could do it today for the beta API. I do not recommend it. It's not going to work out well for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just feel like that conversation is going to go a little bit more, a little smoother if this feature is more mature.
Christoph, you were.
Yeah, I would definitely do it. It would just show the power of V2. It would be like a really nice use case for that. And I don't know if there's a huge difference if you clear all the secrets or everything. If something doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I would just go for it.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me think. Does anyone want to volunteer to just create a tracking issue and put it in the board so that way we have it and can't forget? Whether we bring it up and meet, like we have SIGOT meeting in like what 8 days, so we can bring it up then if we have time. Granted, that agenda is incredibly packed, so maybe not.
I can add an issue, and then we can add it to the agenda. If we get to it, get to it. If not, next one.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then I'll add it to this board.
Yes, Christoph, you didn't have access. Who else doesn't have access to this board?
Around me. Sorry.
Can y'all just ping me in Slack or GitHub handles, and I'll like manually add you to the board so that way.
Sure.
Sorry, it was not intended to be private because that's just All right.
Are you the only person that can add people?
Right now, because I think I created it and made me, well, I mean, an org owner could do whatever, but I think because I created the board, I'm implicitly the admin of the board, so I'm gonna go fix that too. I didn't really realize there was that much RBAC associated with the board. I just made a board and expected it to work like the old ones, but I guess, yeah. I mean, this is a new board, so I can understand why it has all this new feature stuff. So I guess, unless there's something more on the current topic, we can talk about expiring cash. Nish?
Yeah, this was one of the review comments I think we had during 125. So today we're using the LRU cache. So we use that for V1, and then we've continued using that for V2 as well. And then Mike added a comment that like maybe we should actually try using an expiring cache. And then Mo also was thinking if we do that, we might be able to get rid of the cache size in the future.
Yeah, so I'm a big plus on not having that knob just because I don't like it. I mostly think like you should either set it to like -1 or 1,000,000. Like I don't really think there's either cache everything or cache nothing, which to me is basically just a weird API. With the expiring cache, I think we kind of get the correct property, which is as long as there's not ridiculous memory pressure on the API server, it's just going to cache whatever it can. So I think this would be a pretty small change. I guess we would want to add validation to encryption config to make it so that you can't set cache size anymore on the V2 API because it just doesn't mean anything.
So as part of this change, do we also want to remove, or we cannot remove cache size because the same config is shared between V1 and V2?
Yeah, so we would just add validation saying if you're using V2, you cannot set this field because this doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Which is fine, right? This is the point of having a new API in alpha. It gives us time to grow it instead of stressing out about every permutation of upgrades. So I think this is fine. I don't think it's going to cause any issue.
But that change needs to be. I mean, we need to update the cap to reflect that, right?
Yeah. So we can totally do that. I don't think this one will be controversial, but we should.
And hopefully, no one will push back on it, like in terms of backward compatibility.
But it's only affecting the alpha. of V2.
Yeah, we're only changing it for V2.
No, I think you said V1. Sorry, didn't you say you?
So V1 and V2, both of it is using LRU cache today, but because V2 is an alpha, we're planning to switch to expiring cache.
Right. And you're saying that would not be applicable for V2, like the cache size.
You're right.
Right. Okay.
But I'm not going to touch V1 beta 1 at all. I'm just
right. Okay. Then I'm sorry. I heard it the other way around.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I don't know why. Anyway, forget it.
Yeah. No breaking the existing API in any way, basically. I haven't seen any. I had the mail thread open on this one. Did we get approved to have a repo?
Not yet. I'm going to ping Dims because he had approved the last one. So I'm just going to see if there's any process if they need us to attend like Ziggurat architecture call to just explain. But I'll ping him today and just follow up.
Okay. For folks' context, so we want to make a new staging repo for the KMS code, and we will move the proto and stuff in there so that way, if you want to import it, you don't have to import the entire world from Kubernetes land because that's silly. But also, this is where I'm expecting like the reference implementation to live, the key hierarchy code to live, any metrics code, it would all be there, ideally as separate packages within this repo, so people can pick what they want and use it in their own projects. Oh, also an examples directory with like a full implementation of a plugin, basically using all the pieces. Speaking of reference implementation, Christoph, I know you have a bunch of stuff open for us to review, which is high on my list of doing now. So my thought process there is we will probably just review where it is and get it into a state that we're happy with it. And then once this repo is available, we'll just move it over there. Or once the staging stuff is created, then we can make the staging directory and start putting stuff in the core of Kubernetes. Does that sound good? Any thoughts, concerns? Okay. So that one's going on. So I have this one assigned to me, which is it's basically about wiring up the status and stuff correctly, so that if a plugin says that its write key has changed, we'll actually notice and start recording data as stale, so that way if you want to run storage migration, it will work. So I had commented on this on Anisha's implementation, but we just kind of ran out of time in the 125 timeframe. So I didn't think it was a big deal not to have it yet, as long as we're continuing on alpha for another release. And this was basically the original KEP we had written that we had pulled out and then made as a sub item in the second KEP, but then forgot or ran out of time for also, which is basically just logging within the API server logs to be able to say when you see this UID on your KMS plugin, or whatever you see in your key vault or wherever it's going, you can trace back to what was the event within the API server that caused it to do that, if you so choose. So this person said, I want to do this. And I was like, okay. I mean, we can respond saying that's fine. I don't think it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing we had discussed in that comment was you actually have access to the data context, right? So this is what you have access to when the KMS call comes in, which is the path in etcd.
Yeah, so you should have access to the full request info. if the request is coming in from a REST API handler. So you should be able to parse out that structured stuff and have it available. And then you should also just include this, the raw path, as a, basically you should include whatever you have. So if you have the nice structure stuff, include that. If you don't, just include the path, because the KMS code or the storage code is special in the sense that it does not need a REST call to be invoked, right? Because the API server is allowed to invoke its storage layer at its own, for its own reasons. So we can't always guarantee that, oh, Mo tried to get pods, and that's why the KMS plugin was called. But we could say, like, at the bare minimum, we can always say the API server was trying to do something, and this is why it did that. Either way, I think it'll be useful. I'm unsure of how to write a test that asserts that this actually works, because it's a side effect, right? Logs are side effects. They're not. They don't have behavior.
How do we test logs today?
We don't. Okay, like the difference is that this log is like meant to be like effectively an API, whereas normally logs are just like, yeah, human beings read them and kind of do something. So this one's a little bit harder, basically, because it has more. It has more strictness to what we're asking.
Hey, other than the verb, could there be any other metadata that could be sensitive to log?
So back in the day in OpenShift, OAuth tokens, the name of the object was literally the token. That was a bad design. You should not do that. So, that's the obvious thing that comes to mind if you have names that you somehow consider sensitive, right? Like my secret project, because I am like NSA and I use fun names for my objects based on internal secret stuff. That can be bad, I guess. Group and resource, I don't think so, because if you can do discovery against the API server, which basically every user can, you can see all the APIs that exist. I don't think group and resource is particularly interesting. All right, this is just API server logs, right? So you should not let literally everybody in the world read your API server logs. It's not what they're meant for.
Yeah, I guess like I think verb is fine. I think it's just like, optionally any request metadata such as the verb. We probably don't want to log any, right?
That was maybe poor wording on my part. It like of the stuff available to us, we should carefully pick out what we think is good. Though I don't think there's really anything sensitive other than maybe name and namespace, and they're not sensitive as much as they might be considered private. So that one, I mean, it would be kind of really annoying from a log level not to have the namespace and name of the associated object. It makes it really hard to tell what's wrong if there's something wrong. Right, so like if you want the logs to be useful, they need to contain the metadata. But if you don't want the logs to contain anything that could theoretically be sensitive, then they can't contain the metadata. So I'm not really sure. That's why I had recommended something along log level 6. So it's not gonna just happen by default.
Okay, I mean, I just want to make sure that's what you were thinking.
Yeah, and I know we had explicitly said it was out of scope for now, but maybe we just have this at a high log level saying that it's not normally going to be there, and at some point in the future we could try to include it in audit logs for the things that have audit logs associated with them. Then it's perfectly fine to include the metadata, right? Because audit logs are supposed to be sensitive and private. So I think we're kind of okay there. Right, for the stuff in progress. So Nilek, you are working on hot reloading the config.
Yep.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna give update. Like, so I finished the implementation part of it, and I was able to test it as well, like how the changes can take effect, and how we can do it. I think the next part for me is I'm just gonna start writing tests for this, and hopefully I'll make a PR this week. I do have like a couple thoughts around it, like maybe a different ways to implement this. But yeah, I think I'll just probably either just create a PR or probably just sync offline and see what may be the best approach.
Okay. I think the only like open question I had in my mind on the hot reloading was, do you have to opt in, or is it just a new behavior?
Right now, it's probably just a new behavior.
Right.
We don't have any flag or something like that. Basically.
Yeah,
so
and that is what I want. The only concern I have is, like, for example, Anish was telling me how, for example, the Azure, like the AKS stuff does, like how the actual core of it uses this stuff. Technically, it creates an invalid intermediate state when it does it, which is it updates the encryption config with a new write key without first having it as a read key, right? And that's okay today, because until you restart the API server, it doesn't matter yet, right? But for example, in OpenShift, when I wrote this code, I always made sure that it didn't matter if your API server just crashed and burned in the middle of it. There was no way for it to come up in an order that was going to make it write data that other API servers couldn't read yet, right?
Correct.
That dance is much harder to write than just changing it. So that was the concern I had, was that, like, because today it doesn't happen automatically, you could get into trouble where you're relying on it not happening automatically to not start encrypting data with a key that not all API servers are aware of.
Right.
This might still be fine. Like, it might be one of those, like, goes at like high priority release note, like, hey, use the encryption feature, make sure that your intermediate states are not invalid, because that's never been allowed. You were just relying on the fact that the API server didn't immediately read them, right? Because even though the API server is not immediately reading them, it could crash at any moment. It just, the whole VM could and die at any moment, right? So like
right,
the state exists in a bad way, no matter what. It's just that we would be making this more common. I still lean towards just doing it, because that was sort of the approach we took for certificates and stuff. It's just,
yeah, I was gonna say that, because certificate does the exactly same thing, or like more or less the same thing. But yeah, I'm curious actually. I think once I'm started writing tests, let's see if I discover something that making this state invalid. That's it.
But let's say we don't need a feature flag, but just having like a flag in the API server, do you think would make sense to turn off this behavior if the user doesn't want it?
I don't know. I would question why you don't want it.
I think you want it.
Another approach could be that it only hot reloads V2 stuff. It doesn't reload all of them. Right.
That's very tricky, because like the whole reload is on the whole file. So like it's very tricky to explain why it only happens for V2.
No, but we can always watch and parse and figure it out. Then it's up to us whether we want to do. Yeah, I mean, it's up to us, like whether we want to do anything with it or not. So
yeah,
I think it's one of the most interesting feature, and I don't see why someone don't want to have that, because this is reducing so much work from a day-to operation standpoint, and access to specific resources too. So to be able to reload the API servers.
Yeah.
Should be default behavior.
Yeah, my only concern is if we are not thinking about some corner case, and if they upgrade, then we're basically breaking them without a way to get back to a working state. So if we introduce like a flag that just allows them to like disable it in 1 or 2 releases, and then like if we don't get any complaints, like it can be one of those flags which is enabled by default, but with an option to disable.
Yeah, so I think we can bring this up as part of the KEP discussion and the SIGAUTH meeting and just see what folks think. There's not that many users of this API. So, and most of them happen to be on the SIGAUTH call. So they can yell at us if we're like, yeah, we're going to change your API for you. I know Mike wasn't super excited about like how reloading this, and I was like, dude, I just don't want to rebuild the KMS cache every time. Like it's just slow. Like it doesn't matter how performant you make the API. At the end of the day, making a bunch of network calls, like it's going to be slow sometimes. So okay. Then we have the next two are the same thing. I think one's the issue and one's the proposed PR, which is during the implementation, just because we ran out of time, we ended up causing some Go routine leakage in our integration test suite. So we want to undo that. And I was not a fan of the proposed approach of just expanding the transformer interface to just basically have a no-op method in 99% of cases, and in one place it's not a no-op. So I was gonna ask for a better approach that only made transformers that need to be stopped have such a thing. But either way, this is just a regression to our test suite that we caused because we ran out of time. And I was gonna merge a Band-Aid fix for it, but then it was past code freeze, and I was not about to violate code freeze over a nice to have. So that's just another thing that we have to do.
Yeah, and then this is all just to add context. This is not specific to V2. So like this is also changing V1, like the way it's done. So.
In a very minor way. It's just allowing open connections to be closed when the system is exiting effectively, which happens a bunch of times in tests. It doesn't realistically happen on production clusters because they start up and then they go down, but the same process does not like start up and go down over and over internally, right? But tests do that a bunch. So the Go routine leakage can kind of explode that way. So that covers what we have on the board right now. So what's not reflected on the board is a reference stuff, the reference implementation stuff. That's still in Anish's issue tracker. So mostly because Anish and I ran out of time, so we haven't gone through and curated that stuff into issues yet. And then this stuff, this is not in the board. Anish.
Yeah, it's not in the board yet. I think we should start it.
Yeah, we should. In general, I've been thinking about how to enhance the V2 API to make the rotation story much better. So we talked a bit in that original cap about the storage version hash and stuff. And then when I talked to API Machinery, they were like, yeah, that API has been alpha for 2 years. And I was like, yeah, can it not be alpha? Like, no, because no one's working on it. So it's still in alpha state, hasn't moved, not because it's good and done. It's still not done. So I've been reading the KEPs and stuff, and of course the KEPs don't line up with the code inside of the API server, so that's always fine. So I'm still trying to figure out what to do here. I talked with Anish a bunch about this. One high-level approach that I had was to basically funnel like some kind of identifier and the state of the API server to the plugin, and then let the plugin do something with it with like a theoretical implementation that we could write like as an open source thing that people could use if they wanted to. Could use some custom resource to coordinate the API servers and what key ID they're on, and then wire that up to like a controller that when it sees changes, it can ask the storage version migrator to do storage migration, basically. So that is an approach. The thing I've been struggling with is how much of this should just be part of the KMS feature set. Like, I struggle to think about this stuff. Like, if you're going to go through the effort of having like this KMS integration, are you really not going to have any rotation story? Like, is rotation really optional for you? And it might be like in your alpha implementation, but it will quickly show up as a request for anyone that actually cares. So I was trying to think of like, if it made sense to have dedicated feature sets within the API server to do this. The concern I have there is it feels like it has a lot of overlap with those existing alpha features. So I feel like I'm gonna get a lot of pushback if I like try to go build my own sandcastle in the corner and ignore the existing sandcastle that's half done. So that's kind of where I'm at on this. So, but for me, like for 126, like the priorities are coming up with some strategy for rotation for KMS v2 and getting Christoph's reference stuff in, so that way we have that baseline and we can start working on it together. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think like we should probably like share that, create a doc with what we had discussed, and then like we can go with that. I think most you were also suggesting we can just open a PR on the KEP and keep adding details there, or like maybe we can just start with the doc with what we discussed, and then like see what other folks think as well.
Yeah, since we chatted, I found some like issues in not like intractable issues, but I found some like edge cases that we would have to handle. The harder part I'm trying to have, that if I look at the existing KEPs from the API machinery folks, they have a lot of complexity around API server identity and like how it's like they have like 3 or 4 different KEPs on basically that are intertwined around the same thing. And I was trying to come up with like, what is like the minimum thing in this that actually has the right properties without all of this like intertangling. And I'm just, I just need to read a lot more of the API server code in this area to like just get, because they have pieces in controller manager, then they have pieces in the API server, and they're all using, like a bunch of them have like if statements on like 1 or 2 feature flags being enabled. So I was like, okay, that's cool. No one's going to be able to reason about which of these pieces is actually running on their cluster. And like, it was weird because they were like, yeah, we're going to put one of these controllers in the controller manager and the other one in the API server. I was like, because we want to leverage some feature from one place and another. I was like, I don't find this to be a benefit. I find this to be a way of confusing people, because now different components like logically run this stuff, and they have different versions, right? Like the API server and the controller manager are different binaries. So now you have to like remember which one is running at what version. So it's just kind of messy. And I was like, the concern I have with any like optional external approach is the complexity of running that stuff is then offloaded to the poor soul that has to run it. And so they have to understand the ordering and everything of all those components and their config and how it all relates. And that's a lot of moving pieces. It's not that it's intractable, it's just a bunch of work. And I was really hoping for not a bunch of work, and instead a feature that was mostly built in and complete. So like instead of rotation being a thing that you do a bunch of work to happen, or like even if you ignore the storage migration step, like if we could get to the point where rotation was, you change your key ID in your KMS key vault, and you somehow are then at the end of it all notified that, hey, you're ready to do storage migration. And so you just run storage migration. Like that sounds so much better than run these 7 components with exactly wired up config. And then they do basically that, but like none of it's internal. Like it's, and it's all technically optional. So that, yeah, I'm just struggling with convincing myself that having this stuff be optional is, or not in the core, is a good idea. Just putting it in core limits the flexibility we have overall, because it has to do like just one thing basically. I just think doing that one thing is better than letting people kind of go, like, and I'd be okay with some flag to just turn off the internal control groups and you get to do whatever you want. Like, I don't really care about that part. I'm more about how much work does someone have to do? Like to me, it should be possible as like a vendor to have every one of your clusters have encryption at rest enabled by default with automatic key rotation by default. And it's not like a big ask. You don't spend a bunch of your team's time getting everything set up, right? And your customers might ask for like, oh, I want to have my own key and I want to rotate it myself. Fine, whatever. That should be possible, but I just want the security by default should be the easy step, not the hard step. And right now, I feel like it's going to end up being the hard step still, unless we build more. That's kind of where my head's at, and I'm still trying to put the pieces together, basically. Anybody got any thoughts?
Still trying to process your thoughts. So.
Yeah, they're not that well articulated yet.
I look forward to the doc.
If we don't have any thoughts on the last thing, I was going to ask Ram. I know you have those 2 issues. If Anish, if you could pull them up, maybe we could talk through them some. I wanted to just kind of get some explanation and stuff from you, so that way when we talk about it with other folks, I have a little bit more, like I read it, but like it wasn't always exactly clear to me.
Yeah. So the first one that you pulled up here, it's the remove. Yeah. So this one can be closed against the issue that was discussed, the 11111919 for the hot reload. Because basically, this one was to remove the concept of the ordering within the file, so that we don't have to restart all the time the API server when we do such a change. And it's just not about the order, but it's adding new providers and so on. So because it's really painful, and most of the time, well, not most of the time, but quite often, when we do this, it means that we have to go back to the control plane and restart the API server. So it's kind of painful, and it would also help. And that I'm grateful for the hot reload effort for the managed Kubernetes offerings, because obviously there's no access at all to the ability to restart an API server there. So, so this one can be definitely closed against that hot reload issue. That's my feeling, at least.
Could you explain to me how? So I understand how hot reloading makes it so you don't have to restart the API server, and in all environments, managed or not, it makes changing the config just much more tractable, because you don't have to do like a process restart dance. You just change the file, and at some point the file will be read and the config will be there. And if you're not too worried about knowing that exact time, because usually you don't care that much, just wait an hour and it's almost guaranteed to have happened. So that part makes sense. bit about order is unclear to me. What about ordering is assisted or not with?
So the ordering is part of the other issue that I opened, because what we see that most of the time when we implement stuff when we implement Trousseau as an example, as a provider plugin with customers, they often not change anything about the file. So they might have the identity first and then the KMS provider in, and they don't understand why it's not encrypted. So we have to explain them, and they need to change the order in because that's the way it is. It's going to look at the file, and if the KMS is second, it's not gonna work. So that's more like a day two misunderstanding issue, I think. I'm coming back on my statement earlier about the it would help on managed services like AKS and so on when we don't have access to the control plane, because we actually will not have access to the file, so it will not help. So that's something that just occurred to me right now. So that's the part. And the ordering, the reason why I would love to remove the ordering also is to be able to think about having multiple KMS encryption. We have that use case with a customer, government customers, where they do multi-tenancy, and they wish to have multiple different KMS because each tenant might come up with their own KMS provider, and or set of keys, whatever. And then that's the moment they would like to target a specific KMS provider in order to be fully multi-tenant in their environment. So I just put an example there. I'm a noob, so I just came up with an annotation approach where you would define a KMS provider by using the name of the ID from the encryption configuration file that would allow them to target a specific KMS in that file. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So okay. So I guess some things I want to pretty explicitly avoid in this API is exposing it to end users.
Yeah.
So like, I realize that having this as files on disk makes it problematic to talk about from a Kubernetes API perspective, like problematic to interact with, but that's actually like part of the design of it, right? Like it is a Unix domain socket on the host.
Yes.
Because like the persona that's responsible for this is the infrastructure operator. So you as the Kubernetes cluster admin don't get a say. You as a customer to that operator need to tell them, I will pay you money if you give me choices here, but not because that's what like you can't realistically start talking about UDSs through the Kubernetes API, right? Because they're like, you can't orchestrate that. It has to exist upfront in the infrastructure, right? It's very deeply tied to like, well, are you running the control plane as pods? Are you running on just bare metal as processes? Like people kind of go crazy on how they deploy Kubernetes. And I mean, that's great, I guess. I'm a little dubious about the flexibility on these components, but whatever. That's, I guess people love their toys and want to play around with them. So I'd be very, very nervous about like, so already within Kubernetes, within SIG-Auth, we've already taken the stance of policy cannot be subdivided within namespaces, right? That's why pod security admission is just based on labels on namespaces with the explicit ask that like within a namespace, there is no segregation. We don't support that because the main thing that Kubernetes is about is workloads. And the second you can create a pod, well, you can mount any secret, any service account. So all the splicing, sub-slicing within namespaces just doesn't make any practical sense once you have that, because that's the core feature of Kubernetes. So that's why we went with the label approach with namespaces. I don't know, like, I don't think it makes that much sense, or I mean, what am I trying to? I would be concerned about, even at the namespace level, having some way of talking about KMS plugins. Like, as a for example, like if you typo the name, what is supposed to happen?
Yeah.
Like, is like everything supposed to fail in the namespace? Is it silently supposed to keep working? Like, I don't understand. And at the same time, because the KMS plugin and its integration is owned by the by the infrastructure operator, but the Kubernetes API is owned by the customer once they have it, like full cluster admin access. Like, if the infrastructure operator needs to change something, like make a new plugin or whatever under the hood just for some maintenance, like they don't know what you've done, right? So you're going to constrict their ability to sort of interact with the system in that way. Now,
but this is representing like 20% of the actual reality in the world, because 80% of the platform, and I'm using platform here instead of infrastructure, platform owner are also the Kubernetes admins, and that's where there's a I think it works well in that construct for cloud providers, where indeed you're paying a provider to do whatever you want, or not actually, as a security standpoint. But the reality is that there's a lot of, as you were mentioning, people who implement their environment as they wish, and that those people are the same people, sadly, that are owning both hats.
Right. So I don't have like updated numbers on like how many people use cloud provider Kubernetes, but that I don't think that's important. I agree with you that both parties exist.
Yes.
Or both scenarios exist, where the infrastructure provider and the Kubernetes cluster admin are the same persona, or is the same human versus not. So I agree with you totally there. So to trying to come up with some way to support that, the closest thing I've been able to think of, which is still a half-done thought, is either support within the encryption configuration itself to say, some set of namespaces. Like today it's group resource, right? It could be groups resource namespace. You could say that, you could further constrain where the KMS plugin is being applied to. Or instead of having it encryption in the encryption configuration, you could have it as part of the metadata of requests made back to the plugin. So like the multiplexing could happen at the KMS plugin level itself, saying like, hey, I'm asking you to encrypt something, and the namespace that's associated with that something is foobar. So the problem there is it breaks the key ID concept we have today, because it's global to the plugin. So I don't think that works out, or not in the current iteration. Nice thing is all alpha, so we can change it and do what we need to do. So I haven't come up with something that makes me go, yay, like this will work.
Well, also, like, because this is very it introduces a lot of nuance and perhaps not backward compatible, right? I definitely want to see if there are more users who want this. This is why I asked you to open this issue. And, again, per your comment earlier, right? If there's a lot more users that want this, we would like to see more plus ones. And so far, we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so I am nervous about this from complexity perspective. I'm trying to think. I guess there's no limit on key ID. It's just a string. You can put anything you want in there. So if you wanted to, you could represent multiple key IDs in there as like an encoded JSON object if you wanted, or whatever, like however you wanted to delimit them. So you could still probably make it work.
Oh yeah. So with Trousseau, we made some kind of a concept where we targeting multiple different KMS providers like AWS and Vault, and so that's working somehow, but it's lacking the ability to do it in an easy way by defining label or an annotation from a user perspective. So it requires a lot of moving pieces to do it, as you were mentioning earlier with the storage for migration, with having the ability to have CRDs and all that, those components. We can do it. It's not a problem. It's just like the complexity of such a solution. So yeah, because
this annotation, like, is there any validation for who can use what annotation?
Yeah, that's maybe it's coming back to what Mo was mentioning about having a different approach from the encryption configuration file, where we could add something there to mention, like instead of getting the name or defining a group of a namespace, or I don't know, that instead of naming the actual providers, I guess it's more the creation that it will fail. So if it's unless it's changed on the go, it should just fail and give an error, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, assuming we can, if we ignore the complexity for a second, or feedback on needing such a feature for a second, like if we were to implement this, I think it needs to stay in the veil of the infrastructure operator persona. Like, it needs to stay within the things that they can fully control, because they need to guarantee that it works, that persona, right? And that means I don't think we can do anything that shows up in the Kubernetes API as some kind of construct. Like for example, like if we were trying to do this truly as a Kubernetes API, it would probably require changing object meta. And I can guarantee you SIGArch will deny me changing object meta, because the bar for changing object meta is just impossibly high now, because it has to be perfectly consistent across the Kubernetes API and what it means. And yeah, we've had, I think the last time we changed it was for paging. But yeah, it's just a really high bar, and it's hard to make everything work perfectly with it, because of how expressive the Kubernetes API is. So I don't think we're gonna get success there. I'm also concerned about the namespace type approach, because not all resources are namespaced.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe you could argue that you cannot apply multi-tenancy to like nodes on your Kubernetes API, because there's no way to express like who can mess with the node objects, like other than directly saying you can edit this node and this other node and that other node, and somehow the names that you can edit, so you can go mess with those, but not other ones.
Yeah, I think we can still prototype this from our plugin perspective. So
I guess, what would you expect? Like so if you were gonna, it's unclear. Like, let's say we change nothing about the V2 API and it sort of is what it is. What would you do? I don't know how you can.
Oh, we'll do it in a different way. So here when we discuss with so we have two major government agency that we're working with. One is the equivalent of the Homeland Security, but for Europe, and the other one is in Hong Kong. And we were discussing about that approach of multi-KMS because they need it. So basically, if you think about those, they have a massive Kubernetes cluster. It's 2,000 nodes, I think, something like that. And they have all the different countries are a tenant there, and they wanted to have they don't have like one KMS in particular that they want to work with. Each country has its own ways of dealing with the keys. So in that design, that's where we were looking into having something within the definition of the objects, instead of having multiple providers trying to do something that we would require the very same running component deployed to make it happen. So that's the reason why. So removing as much of but I think it's as you were mentioning, it's a question of moving the complexity from one side to another, and I think the impact on do we want to have the impact on the platform, or maybe just on the plugin for that specific tenants? Because otherwise we would have, if there's something that goes south, the entire platform and the entire tenants might be at risk. So that might be worth considering. I might agree with you, but.
So I just as an FYI, the way Kubernetes is built today, no matter what we do here, if a single KMS plugin that's encrypting a single secret, if it's unavailable, the entire platform falls over.
Yeah.
And that's by design, sadly, because Kubernetes requires fully logical, consistent lists. So a single re-error in that list means the platform stops working. So within the scenario that you just described, you need 100% availability from every single one of those plugins.
Yeah, that's why we redesigned it to be fully distributed to make sure that we don't have any interesting outcome, which was the case on the first implementation.
Yeah. Okay, so we can continue, I think, the discussion on Sagat meeting. You know, if you have users that are willing to comment and say, hey, I need this, that would be great.
I will ask them.
It's always nice to have customers that say, I want a thing, because you're building the right things instead of, or at least you're building a thing that someone wants instead of just guessing. But yeah, this one is hard. I don't have good answers on this one. Well, I'm not going to say I have good answers on any of the stuff we talked about, but this one I definitely don't have good answers for.
The debate is much more important. So, okay, I will ask the different customers to come and put a thumbs up.
Yeah, and if I don't know how late the SIGAUTH meeting is for you, but if you can attend it, that'd be great. It's much easier for you to represent your view instead of us trying to do it for you.
Okay, I will try to join.
I realize it's late in your time zones. So
no, I'm currently so I'm based. So the funny thing is that I'm based in between two continents, because I'm in San Jose for the moment. Okay. But otherwise I'm based in the Netherlands for the job, but I do back and forth for personal reasons.
Well, if we get to have KubeCon in the Netherlands, like it's supposed
next year,
and I get to go this time instead of COVID crashing my party, we should totally meet up.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah, definitely. But it should be in Amsterdam next year. So yeah. Cool. Thank you for listening to me.
No problem. I realized we were like way over.
Yeah. By the way, this is every other week, so just FYI. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Well.